Mogul Motivation, educating and empowering entrepreneurs 1 week at a time. Presented by True Stories Media. And I am your host, Antoine Twiz Taylor.
It takes extraordinary action to hit extraordinary targets. Last week I talked about extraordinary targets, about how you have to set goals so high that even if you miss them, you land in places you never imagined you can land in before. And you can use that platform as a launching pad to continue to hit that extraordinary target that you set out to accomplish in the first place. On my entrepreneurial journey, I created a formula out of my imagination. I didn't read about this or anything. I just literally created it out of my mind, called the Toolbox effect. The Toolbox effect is something that will guide you on the process of taking extraordinary action so you can accomplish your goals and hit your targets. It's a 3-step process, but it's very complex. The very first step is you have to have an honest conversation with yourself. Be 100% transparent and identify what's the barrier between you and your goals. The second step is, after you identify the barrier, you have to identify the tools that's going to help you knock down that barrier. And the third step, which is the most complex and tedious step, you have to figure out how to get the tools in your hand. It sounds simple, but it's very complex, like I said, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of action, extraordinary action. For the sake of example, say you want to buy a home. What's the barrier between you and buying that home? It could be bad credit. It could be lack of income. These are barriers. What are the tools that's going to knock down those barriers? Paying off debt, more income. But how do you pay off debt? How do you get more income? That's the third step. How do you get the tools in your hand to knock down the barriers? And you see, you have to understand that this third step, getting the tools in your hand, how do you do that? It's the most complex step, the most complicated step, because it's barriers to that within itself. So for the sake of example, like we said, you want to buy a home, bad credit, that's a barrier. How do you break down that barrier? Pay off debt, more income. These are tools. How do you get more income? How do you pay off that debt? So it's barriers to that. Because now you have to figure out, do I pick up more hours of work? Do I get a part-time job? How do I ramp up my sales and my business? Every solution always has problems within itself. And that's why dream chasing and entrepreneurship isn't for the faint of heart. Because you literally have to knock down barrier after barrier after barrier after barrier after barrier just to get to your ultimate goal, which has its own barrier at the end of the road. It can be very tiresome, physically, mentally, emotionally. Can you imagine that? Alone, the same example that we've been using. You're trying to buy your house. You know you need to boost your credit. You know you need more money. But sales are still slow in your business. You can't find another job. You're stuck in a rat race. You know what the solution is, but it's still barriers around you. The toolbox effect is never ending, but the toolbox effect is very effective. Because as long as you know what the solution is, regardless of how many problems stand between you and that solution, regardless of how many barriers you have to knock down, regardless of how many tools you have to equip yourself with, it's still black and white. You still know what you have to do. So as long as you know what you have to do, you can go to work. You can take extraordinary action to accomplish your goals and hit those targets. You see, a lot of us are lost because we refuse to have that transparent conversation with ourselves. We refuse to identify what the barrier is in the first place. We refuse to identify what the tools are to knock down that barrier. And then we refuse to equip ourselves with those tools. We refuse to follow the toolbox effect. We refuse to put in work. We refuse to have action. We're lost. And when you're lost, of course, you're never going to go nowhere. It's better to be frustrated knowing what the solution is and putting in work than to be frustrated and lost and not know what to do at all. You have the instructions. You know what you got to do, ladies and gentlemen. You just got to do it. Extraordinary action is going to get you to extraordinary targets. The toolbox effect is nothing fancy. It's just something that works for me. And this works for any goal that you have. It doesn't have to be a home. It doesn't have to be a car. It could be losing weight. It could be increasing sales in your business. It could be literally anything. You can do it as long as you identify what the barrier is in the first place that's stopping you from accomplishing it. And then you identify what the tools are that's going to knock down that barrier. And then you identify, how do I get the tools in my hand in the first place? There's nothing fancy about it, but it's very complex. It's going to lead you down a lot of holes, a lot of frustration, but it's possible as long as you know what you have to do. So that's my message, ladies and gentlemen. Let's continue to work. Let's continue to imagine reality. The toolbox effect. It's frustrating, it's complex, but it's effective. It has helped me accomplish many goals on my entrepreneurial journey, and I'm sure it can help you accomplish a lot of goals on your journey. If this podcast has benefited you in any way, shape, or form, I ask for two things as always. Number one, please leave a 5-star review. And number two, pass it on to a friend who may benefit from it as well. Have a great day, everyone. I'll talk to you next week.